In 1989, a British software engineer at CERN submitted a proposal that his supervisors labeled vague but exciting. They filed it away and moved on. The document described a system for linking information across computers using something called hypertext. Management saw no immediate use for it. Research institutions already had email and file transfers. Why complicate things further? The engineer was Tim Berners-Lee, and his idea would become the World Wide Web. But in that moment, standing in the corridors of the world's largest particle physics laboratory, he was just another programmer with a vision no one else could see. So he decided to build it himself, quietly, in the margins of his official work, without permission and without funding. Timothy John Berners-Lee was born in London in 1955 to parents who had both worked on the Ferranti Mark I, one of the earliest commercial computers. His childhood home was filled with mathematics, punch cards, and conversations about logic gates. At Oxford, he studied physics, but spent most of his time building circuits and writing code. He was more interested in how information moved than in what it said. After graduating in 1976, he drifted through telecommunications firms and software companies, always tinkering with ways to organize knowledge. In 1980, he took a 6-month contract at CERN in Switzerland. There he built a small program called Inquire, a private system for tracking connections between people, projects, and concepts. It used hypertext, a way of linking documents that felt natural to him but alien to most. When he returned to CERN full-time in 1984, he found the same problem he'd left behind. Thousands of scientists from dozens of countries, all using incompatible computers, incompatible file formats, incompatible networks. Collaboration was slow and frustrating. Information lived in isolated silos. Berners-Lee believed the solution wasn't a better filing system. It was a new way of thinking about information itself. His 1989 proposal outlined a distributed information system where documents could reference each other across any machine, anywhere. It would use unique addresses, a simple protocol for fetching files, and a markup language for formatting text. The idea was elegant but radical. It required rethinking how institutions controlled and shared knowledge. His supervisors acknowledged its potential but offered no resources. They had particle accelerators to run. Undeterred, Berners-Lee began working nights and weekends. Unlike most inventors, he didn't seek glory or patents. He was driven by a singular frustration: information should be accessible to anyone who needed it, without bureaucracy or gatekeepers. The first step was writing the protocol itself, HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Then came HTML, the language for creating linked documents, then a server to host them and a browser to view them. By late 1990, he had built the first website, a simple page explaining what the web was and how to use it. It ran on his next computer at CERN. Colleagues who visited his office saw it and were confused. It looked like a list of text with underlined words. When Berners-Lee clicked one, a new page appeared. That was it. No animation, no graphics, no fanfare. Just linked information, instant and borderless. Most dismissed it as a curiosity. Email was faster, they said. File sharing was simpler. Why would anyone want to browse through documents scattered across computers they'd never seen? Berners-Lee explained patiently, because knowledge is connected. A scientist reading about neutrinos might need a paper on particle detectors, which might reference a lab in Japan, which might link to a researcher in California. The web made those connections visible and instant. Slowly, a few researchers tried it. They set up servers. They wrote pages. Berners-Lee helped them debug, refine, and expand the system. He gave away the code freely, refusing to patent any of it. His belief was simple. If the web belonged to everyone, it would grow. If it belonged to one company or institution, it would die. By 1991, the first external servers appeared outside CERN. Universities in the United States and Europe installed them. The web began to spread. Still, the broader computing world ignored it. Commercial networks like CompuServe and AOL were closed ecosystems, profitable and controlled. The idea of an open, decentralized system seemed naive. Investors saw no business model. Corporations saw no revenue stream. But Berners-Lee wasn't building a product. He was building infrastructure, a foundation that others could use to create anything they imagined. The early 1990s were a period of intense, solitary work. Berners-Lee sat in his small office at CERN, surrounded by stacks of technical specifications and half-drunk cups of tea. He wrote documentation for protocols that barely anyone used. He answered emails from confused researchers trying to set up their first servers. He debugged code at midnight when the CERN network was quiet. There were no headlines, no venture capital, no acclaim, just an engineer, convinced he was right, methodically building something the world didn't yet know it needed. His colleagues at CERN were brilliant physicists, but few understood what he was trying to achieve. They saw the web as a tool for their own research, not as a revolutionary platform. Berners-Lee tried to explain this wasn't just about CERN. It was about creating a global space where anyone could publish anything, where borders and institutions dissolved into pure information. But abstractions are hard to sell. People needed to see it working before they believed it could work. In 1991, he posted an announcement on several internet news groups, inviting people to try the web. The response was lukewarm. A few computer scientists were intrigued. Most ignored it. The internet at the time was a fragmented landscape of bulletin boards, FTP sites, and Gopher servers. Each had its own community and conventions. The idea of replacing all of them with a single unified system seemed grandiose. Who was this unknown programmer at a physics lab to suggest such a thing? But Berners-Lee had an advantage that his skeptics lacked. He understood the power of standards. The web wasn't a single application. It was a set of open protocols that anyone could implement. HTTP didn't care what computer you used or what operating system you ran. HTML worked the same way on a Unix workstation as it did on a Macintosh or a PC. That universality was the key. It meant the web could grow without asking anyone's permission. By 1992, a small but growing community had formed around the project. Enthusiasts set up servers at universities and research labs. They created pages listing resources, contact information, and project updates. The web was still tiny, maybe a few hundred sites worldwide, but it was alive. Every new server, every new link proved that the system worked. Berners-Lee spent hours corresponding with these early adopters, refining specifications, fixing bugs, and encouraging experimentation. He also began facing the first real challenges to his vision of an open web. Companies approached him with offers to commercialize the technology. They wanted to license HTTP, to create proprietary browsers, to fragment the web into competing platforms. Berners-Lee refused every offer. He understood that the moment the web became owned by any single entity, its power would evaporate. The beauty of the system was that no one controlled it. It was a commons, like language itself. In 1993, everything changed. A team of students at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications in Illinois, led by Marc Andreessen, released Mosaic, the first graphical web browser. Unlike Berners-Lee's original text-based browser, Mosaic displayed images in line with text. It had buttons, menus, and an intuitive interface. Suddenly, the web wasn't just for programmers and academics. Anyone could use it. Within weeks, Mosaic was downloaded tens of thousands of times. The web's growth curve turned vertical. Berners-Lee watched with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The explosion of interest validated his vision, but it also brought chaos. New browsers appeared, each adding proprietary features. Companies began trying to control standards. The open, decentralized architecture he'd built was under threat from the very success it had achieved. He realized that if the web was to remain free, it needed governance, a neutral body to maintain standards and prevent fragmentation. In 1994, he left CERN and moved to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he founded the World Wide Web Consortium, known as W3C. Its mission was simple: to guide the web's evolution while keeping it open and accessible to all. Berners-Lee became the consortium's director, but he insisted on operating by consensus. He wasn't a dictator or a CEO. He was a steward, someone who protected the web's principles while letting others innovate. The W3C brought together companies, universities, and governments to agree on common standards. It was slow, frustrating work, but it kept the web from splintering. The mid-1990s saw an explosion of commercial activity. Netscape went public. Yahoo and Amazon launched. The dot-com boom began. Entrepreneurs built businesses on the infrastructure Berners-Lee had created, often without understanding or caring about its origins. He could have been a billionaire if he had patented HTTP or HTML. If he had charged licensing fees, he would have owned the internet economy. But that was never his goal. He had built the web to share knowledge, not to accumulate wealth. His decision to give it away freely was, by any measure, one of the most consequential acts of generosity in technological history. While Silicon Valley celebrated its new millionaires, Berners-Lee remained in his modest office at MIT, working on standards and protocols. He lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. He drove an ordinary car, wore ordinary clothes, and avoided the spotlight. Journalists who interviewed him found a man more interested in the web's future than in his own legacy. He spoke about the importance of interoperability, accessibility, and user control. He warned that the web's openness was fragile, that corporate interests could easily undermine it if people weren't vigilant. By the late 1990s, the web had become indispensable. It transformed commerce, enabling businesses to reach global markets instantly. It revolutionized media, allowing individuals to publish without gatekeepers. It changed politics, giving activists and dissidents powerful new tools for organizing. And it reshaped daily life, from how people found information to how they stayed in touch with friends. All of this rested on the foundation Berners-Lee had built in his spare time, a set of protocols so simple and elegant that they could scale from a handful of researchers to billions of users. Yet with success came new problems. Spam, viruses, and hacking became rampant. Governments began censoring content and monitoring users. Companies tracked people's behavior and sold their data. The web, which Berners-Lee had envisioned as a force for openness and collaboration, was being enclosed, commercialized, and weaponized. He watched these developments with growing concern. The web's architecture was decentralized, but its use was increasingly controlled by a small number of corporations and governments. In the 2000s, Berners-Lee began speaking out more forcefully. He argued that net neutrality was essential to preserve the web's open nature. He warned that walled gardens, platforms that locked users in and controlled what they could see, were antithetical to the web's founding principles. He advocated for data privacy, arguing that individuals should own their own information, not surrender it to corporations. These were not popular positions in an era when tech companies were celebrated as innovators and disruptors. But Berners-Lee was consistent. The web was a public good, and it needed to be protected as such. In 2009, he founded the World Wide Web Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to ensuring that the web serves humanity. Its focus was on expanding access to underserved communities, defending digital rights, and promoting policies that kept the web open. Berners-Lee traveled to developing countries, meeting with activists, educators, and entrepreneurs who were using the web to improve their societies. He saw firsthand how transformative the technology could be when it reached people who had been excluded from the global conversation. By the 2010s, the web had entered a new phase. Social media platforms dominated traffic. Mobile devices replaced desktop computers. Cloud computing centralized data. The architecture was still decentralized, but the experience was increasingly controlled by a handful of companies: Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple. Berners-Lee saw this as a betrayal of the web's original promise. He began working on a new project called Solid, a platform designed to let people store their own data and control who could access it. It was an attempt to reclaim the web's decentralized ethos in an age of centralization. The project faced skepticism. Critics said it was impractical, that users didn't care about data ownership, that the convenience of platforms outweighed concerns about privacy. But Berners-Lee persisted, just as he had in 1989 when his proposal was ignored. He believed that the web's future depended on returning power to individuals, on rebuilding the commons that had been enclosed. Solid was technically complex and slow to gain adoption, but it represented something important: a refusal to accept that the web's original vision was obsolete. Throughout his career, Berners-Lee remained an engineer at heart. He didn't give speeches about changing the world. He wrote code, designed protocols, and solved problems. His approach was methodical, patient, and rooted in a deep belief that good systems empower people. He often said that the web was more a social invention than a technical one. Its purpose was to connect people, to break down barriers, to make collaboration easier. The technology was just a means to that end. In 2017, he won the Turing Award, often called the Nobel Prize of Computing, for inventing the World Wide Web. In his acceptance speech, he warned that the web was at a crossroads. It could continue to be a force for openness and democracy, or it could become a tool for surveillance and control. The choice, he said, was up to all of us. The web didn't have a predetermined future. It would reflect the values and decisions of the people who used it. That responsibility couldn't be outsourced to corporations or governments. It belonged to everyone. As the web approaches its fourth decade, Berners-Lee continues to work, still writing proposals, still advocating for open standards, still believing that technology should serve humanity rather than exploit it. He has watched his creation grow from a handful of pages to billions of websites, from a tool for scientists to the infrastructure of civilization. And through it all, he has remained remarkably consistent, humble, principled, and more interested in solving problems than in claiming credit. His legacy is paradoxical. He created one of the most valuable inventions in human history, yet he gave it away for free. He could have been one of the richest people alive, yet he chose a life of modest academic work. He built a system that empowered billions, yet most people don't know his name. That anonymity is, in a sense, the ultimate tribute. The web works so seamlessly, so invisibly, that it requires no explanation. It simply is, like electricity or running water, a utility woven into the fabric of daily existence. Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the man whose proposal was ignored, who built the web in his spare time, who gave it to the world and asked for nothing in return. His invention doesn't demand attention. It simply connects, enabling everything, powering everything, a gift that has reshaped human civilization. And that quiet revolution, written in code and released without fanfare, may be the most profound legacy any engineer has ever left behind.